Success in the media business doesn't happen overnight. It's a bumpy, complicated, high-stakes journey. It's all about staying alive whilst navigating between big losses and big wins. And I know because I lived through it for 16 years. My name's Sam Barcroft, and 2 decades ago, I started a business from my back bedroom in Tottenham, building it into an international content company and finally selling it in 2019. Since then, I've been helping other entrepreneurs to scale their businesses. And one of the most important elements to success is the belief that anything is possible if you're truly committed. So, welcome to the Big Swing podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring behind-the-scenes business stories from the world's most successful content creators. We break down their remarkable careers into the 3 most pivotal moments, the big swings that shape their future during their journey to success. Welcome to the Big Swing. This week, it's quite personal for me. I'm a great believer in both self-help and coaching. In 2019, I was struggling. We were about to sell our business, but the deal looked like it might fall apart at any moment. I was physically and emotionally exhausted, and I wasn't sure I could get the win we were all so desperate for. So I turned to Google and, with a gigantic slice of luck, found the leading media executive coach, Remy Blumenfeld. I remember walking around a field opposite my house one autumn evening while speaking with Remy for the first time, and it was such a relief to find somebody so competent, bright and caring to support me at such an important moment. And we've carried on working together ever since, through the sale and exit of my business, and now as I develop my next adventures. But as we sat down to record this episode, I realised that despite all our work together, there was a lot I still didn't know about Remy. Here's what I do know. Before becoming a coach back in 1991, Remy set up one of Britain's most successful independent production companies, Brighter Pictures. During the decade he ran the company, Remy pioneered a television format revolution, creating FLAVA for Channel 4, Love Match for ITV, Take the Mic, and Gay, Straight or Taken, to name just a few. This fantastic run of success was an incredible feat. If you work in TV, you already know that selling just one format is hard enough. 10 years later, Remy sold Brighter Pictures to TV powerhouse Endemol, known for being the home of Big Brother. He became creative director and was responsible for the delivery of more than 300 hours of TV programming each year. After building and selling a second production company, he became director of formats at ITV Studios, increasing revenues while simultaneously delivering even more hit shows. So, just how did the son of American artists who landed in rural Cambridgeshire become such a disruptor and leader in television? And was there a light bulb moment when Remy realised that working in TV was going to be his destiny?
I think, having worked as a coach for a while, I can probably bring a level of insight into why I went into TV that I didn't maybe have at the time. So I think as a child, I felt like my dad didn't approve of me, like my dad didn't think I was good enough. Now, I realized that that was a story I probably made up based on scant evidence at the time. So if the story that we create in our childhood is I'm not pretty, then usually the suit of armor that we construct is I'll be the most beautiful woman in the world. And TV, as you know, having worked in the industry yourself for many years, really attracts people who feel not good enough. So for me, if 1 million people watched what I was doing, I had to be good enough. And the fact that my dad didn't really engage in popular culture, didn't really have a TV, didn't watch the programs that I would eventually make, made that space even a better space for me to show to the world, and especially him, that I was good enough. 1 million people are watching my program, Dad, so you see, I am good enough. And that, Sam, is what first attracted me to TV.
And it was the father-son dynamic that spurred Remy to pack his bags, return to the Big Apple and take his bite out of it. This was his first big swing, stepping into the spotlight onto the main stage of show business and conquering US television as an entertainment presenter.
I went for the pure heroine version of TV. I didn't get some job behind the scenes. I went straight on air in New York, and I had a show called Remy's People and then the Remy Report. And I was mainlining approval, right? At the time in New York, there were only 5 channels. There was no cable, there was no satellite, there were no streamers. There were just 5 channels, and I was on one of them every night on the news at 10 doing the Remy report and Remy's people. And so I was recognized on the street when I walked home. People knew my name, and, it was a buzz, and it was an antidote to feeling not good enough. And that is how I got into TV. I remember my agent in New York saying to me, in TV, the secret is just be yourself. And if you can fake that, you've got it made.
That's great guidance, isn't it?
Kind of faking being myself.
How did you find the TV industry in the UK accepting of you coming back from being an anchor in the US?
Well, I was a novelty act. And the thing is that TV in the early 90s in the UK was very reverential towards America. They thought of that as being a place of success, particularly in entertainment and light entertainment and factual entertainment, which were all genres which didn't exist in the UK at that time. And when I came back in the late 80s, we did a show daily called 31 West, which was an entertainment show, and I presented that. But what I learned in America was to produce, because essentially they sent me out with a camera to report my own stories, but I had to write them, find them, cut them, edit them, present them in the studio. But that's where I kind of cut my teeth. And so when I came back to the UK, I knew how to do all those things, which most people here didn't really know how to do, because the BBC crews that were their equivalent were much larger. And what I discovered was I really liked the process. I enjoyed the teamwork. I enjoyed the camaraderie. I liked it. And the fact that no one could see didn't bother me half as much as I thought it would. But I guess it did kind of bring me to that place of my first big decision in life, which was at work, which was to go from in front of the camera to behind the camera. But in this case, 2 things happened. One, I discovered I didn't really need the adulation as much as I thought, and I'd kind of come off the mainlining of success and affirmation that I'd experienced in New York quite rapidly, and it was okay. I was still alive. I didn't need that drug as much as I had come to think I needed it. And secondly, BSB came off the air overnight. So the little show that I had, that I was making every day that no one could see, was no longer being made because it was swallowed up by Murdoch, and we were all out of a job. And so that was when I decided to launch a production company out of my front room, which was a big decision and, could be thought of as being brave, but actually it was made out of circumstance, which was that the show I had didn't exist anymore and I didn't have a job.
Do you remember how that felt when you found out that BSB was going to close, and that all of a sudden your kind of successful return to England had come to, career-wise, had come to a sharp kind of turn in the road?
Yeah, it felt all kinds of things at once. On the one hand, it kind of felt like we were all little puppets in the studio, because yes, sure, we were the people making the content for this channel, but we were the last to hear about it. And obviously, the people who had put the money into BSB had known about it for months, because they'd been negotiating a deal that was just closing, but we only got to hear about it when the deal closed and it was in the papers. So that sense of powerlessness was pretty profound. And also the sense of being left out on the street without a job. And I remember at the time, I kind of witnessed my colleagues being called into the executive producer's office one at a time for little conversations, and they'd come out looking quite cheerful and saying, oh, well, Steve seems to have found me a job here, and Steve seems to have found me a job there. And eventually, I was so kind of upset by this that I, having not been called in to see Steve, knocked on his door and said, Steve, everyone else in the office has been called in to see you, and you seem to have found something for them to do, or you're trying to help them. Why haven't you called me? And he looked at me like I was literally insane. And he said, you don't need my help. I'm only calling in people who I need to help. You'll be fine. And that was the end of the conversation. And I obviously projected something of aura that I wasn't aware of projecting, because he generally thought it was absurd to think that he would need to help me because I would land on my feet.
What I've learned in this world is that timing is often everything. And it was this moment, this interaction, this timing that defined his career.
By being a producer, I now felt like I had some element of agency and control, and I wasn't losing out on any of the fame because I didn't have it here anyway. So it was those two things really that came hand in hand.
Got it. So you had nothing to lose. Yeah.
I had nothing to lose.
With his producing and presenting experience in the bag and not wanting to be tied to other people's decision making and control, Remy took the huge decision to become an entrepreneur. He decided to start Brighter Pictures, his very own television production company, initially working out of his front room in Brixton. And once he'd taken that step, it was all about positioning. What would make Brighter Pictures' offerings stand out from the crowd in a highly competitive marketplace?
Well, we kind of made a decision to pitch shows that we would want to watch. And I know that sounds a little bit obvious, but there were a lot of people making a lot of programs that we didn't watch. And so, I mean, I say we, to begin with, it was just me in my bedroom pretending I was the company. But eventually I was joined by my partner, Gavin Hay, who was the managing director, and we assembled a team of people who were all living and working pretty much locally in Brixton. And there were ideas that we thought we'd like to put on TV that weren't on TV. Like, why wasn't black music on TV? It was it came to dominate the charts later, but at the time there was no program for black music. So we pitched a show called FLAVA to Channel 4, which ended up being on, for 9 years on Channel 4. It's also bizarre to think that it lasted that long when, in fact, later, during the course of its run, that same music that we were showcasing as part of Channel 4's remit was dominating the charts. And I think that became a sort of recurring theme of Brighter Pictures, that we were making programs about the edges of society, about gay dating, about trans people, about Indian subculture, about black music, all of these edges which in a very short space of time became the middle. And so what we were doing was kind of exploring our territory, which was around the margins of experience, which then became mainstream, pretty much not exactly while we were on air, but shortly after.
So you were creating things that made sense for people in their 20s and 30s, I suppose, that didn't exist yet, which I suppose then society caught up as a result of that content being out there, maybe a bit of a symbiotic effect potentially.
Yeah, completely. And all of that happened organically and naturally and just because of who we were and where we were at. But, if I was to reverse engineer it, and I often am doing that these days with my clients, one of the first things I say is you really need to define your niche, and it can't be too narrow. And so we both had a group of clients who were pretty much unique to us because they were in those departments that were not served by the bigger production companies. And we also had a niche of programming that we were the experts in. And so if you can be an expert in something, no matter how narrow, it's great, right?
How did you go from just pitching ideas that you thought were cool into really being that tangible proposition for the television producers or for the buyers?
Well, I'd like to say it was because I was so shrewd and savvy and cunning and smart, but the market really helped me because you get so many no's in the areas which are outside of your sweet spot that you figure it's so much more fun getting yeses, and it's so much less energy pitching things which people say yes to, that I'd rather go in with a slate which had a 1 in 6 chance of a commission than going in with a slate that had a 1 in 100 chance of a commission. And in the end, of course, we did get to make some of those shows outside of our sweet spot, but they certainly weren't the shows that defined us. So once we'd kind of established ourselves as a company that broadcasters could trust and that delivered on time and that worked within budget and it was a nice place to work, then it was possible to do some other projects that kind of also spoke to who I am, because I wasn't just, a young gay Jewish man living in Brixton. I was also interested in arts and documentaries. So in the end, all the programs that we made that were outside of our sweet spot were really the only programs that my parents ever saw. So we made mostly one-offs, I would have to say, about other topics. But we also made some broader, more mainstream shows like Get a New Life for BBC Two, which ran for 100 episodes, which was relocating one family each episode to somewhere in the world where they wanted to start a new life.
How did you feel about your father's perception of you once you'd started making these documentaries that were, I suppose, the reward for your effort of following demand so well in the TV industry. You know, you were getting these lovely little films to make alongside the commercial blockbusters.
Well, I guess I was seeking his approval in making those films, because otherwise they weren't much money. You didn't get paid a lot to do one-off documentaries for the BBC or Channel 4. But there was part of me that, you know, was always my parents' son. And so those values around the arts and intellect were always, you know, quite embedded. And I knew that they would be more likely to watch a documentary on BBC Two than they would a late night Channel 4 youth program. And I was later somewhat reassured when I was director of formats at ITV to learn that the guy who was in charge of audience research there had their audience segmented into different tribes. And one tribe was the Rethians. And the people who were the Rethians were people who basically loved the output of BBC 4. They loved documentaries of the kind that I've just described. And if they liked a program, it was basically the kiss of death for ITV, because if they liked a program, it meant that no one else would, right? So in a way, if my dad had ever loved the shows I'd made, it would have been a sign that they were not going to do well with the target audience, because it's basically two audiences. So it was lucky that I got to make both, but I kind of recognized that in both instances, I was kind of chasing approval and trying to kind of disprove a negative, right? I was trying to prove that I wasn't not good enough, right? It's a bizarre thing to think about, but that's sort of what it was. And realizing that was quite freeing.
After a decade of growing the company, creating a formidable reputation, and becoming a big player in the industry, it was time for Remy's next big swing. It was time to sell brighter pictures.
Well, we reached a point where we had different offers on the table to acquire the company, and then the game became, let's sell the company. So we kind of played a game called Sell the Company, which is its own very distinct game from making programs or building a company, right? Because you've got to, as they say, dress the bride. And luckily, you know, we were well run, because my partner Gavin Hay worked on the business side, so our books were all in order. And in the end, buyers are really buying your profit. And I was the creative director. You know, I loved the story that why they were buying us was because we were creative and we had a niche and they loved our programs. But the truth is, Sam, they were buying us because we were profitable and they saw our profit as growing. And that's why a business sells. No matter what they tell you, they're buying your profit. And that's what they bought. But it did create this interesting place in my life. You know, at the age of 35, I'd sold my company. And you know, it's something that most people, I guess, do a little bit later. And I, as a creative person, see life as more cyclical, which is that you go around and you reinvent and you create, and it's rolling, not linear. So it was an opportunity at 35 to sell the company and start something new, start a new adventure. And it coincided with my split from my life partner at the time, Gavin. We're good friends now. We speak every day on the phone. But at that time, we had kind of burnt out in working together and living together and trying to be everything to each other. And so it was what bound us together. But it also was what was kind of sapping the possibility of other elements of our relationship. So it was useful in many ways, but it was a juncture, right? I'd sold the company, sold the business, and left my partner, or we left each other at all the same time.
Now Remy had found himself at a critical juncture. The bittersweet sale of his company, the ending of his relationship, and a downturn in his health that had suddenly taken an unexpected turn for the worse. At a time when he should have been celebrating his success, Remy instead found himself fighting for his life.
I had to have an awkward conversation with the new acquirers, which was that I needed to go to America for a couple of months to have an operation. And I kind of said it to them like it was a minor procedure, like I was going to have a facelift or something. But actually, the truth was I needed to go to have a kidney transplant, because I discovered months after doing the deal that I had kidney failure and, you know, potentially had months to live. And at the time, I wasn't able to have the operation that was necessary in the UK, but I was able to have it in America. And my brother, Jared, who is 5 years younger than me, donated his kidney. And now it so happened that he was an identical match, which couldn't have been more lucky. But all of that happened within the midst of leaving my partner, leaving my business, and starting a new life. So it was very chaotic, traumatic.
I can't imagine what it must have felt like to realize you needed a kidney transplant. That must have made you think about your mortality, I suppose, did it?
Although it may sound weird, it was a real gift. And it was a gift that I would repackage and give to every single person on the planet if I could. The gift of facing your mortality in the middle of your life and then ending up to have more life to live. Because what I realized in facing the end of life was what really mattered to me, right? And it wasn't what I'd achieved, and it wasn't the money in the bank, and it wasn't any awards. It was very simply who I loved and who loved me. Now, on some level, of course, I knew that intellectually before. We all do. But there was nothing that brought it home with such power and impact and total certainty as being told you have months to live.
It's really interesting that you were kind of in a golden handcuffs earnout when that happened. And so I'm assuming after a successful operation, you returned to the UK and kind of got on with your commercial life, kind of leading that business in for its new owners. Is that right?
Yeah, completely. Like nothing happened. Like literally. So originally they'd said to me, you probably need to stay in San Francisco 3 months to recover from the operation. But in the end, I only stayed 2 months. It was over Christmas. It was, I was back and no one really noticed I'd gone.
And after setting up another company that ended up being acquired, Remy became director of formats at ITV Studios, a global powerhouse. He built out the formats team that still exists today, working on big global brand rollouts such as cult favourites Come Dine With Me and the mega hit I'm a Celebrity. But it was also at this time Remy decided that, rather than lead a team, it was time to use his previous experience to enable others, and he began training as a coach. Time for his third big swing. Just like starting his first TV company, Remy had to begin somewhere. Who would his first clients be?
I was coaching the people who I worked with, but I had no training in being a coach. And by the way, they didn't hire me as their coach. So it was this strange relationship where you're sort of being a coach, but with people who don't necessarily want to be coached and you don't have any training. So I did my part of the work, which was to get the training to be a coach, and then came back to try and apply that at the coalface. And what I discovered was, now I was much better as a coach. And in fact, I'd been terrible as a coach before because I didn't know what a coach was really. So now I was a good coach because I was doing everything a coach should do. But I was still working with people who didn't want to be coached, right? I was working with people who wanted me to pat them on the back and send them on their way and give them the approval of a boss. But they hadn't asked for coaching.
And it's so interesting how you followed your path in each of these big decisions you took organically. You kind of must have felt deep inside that these were the right things to do, but you weren't necessarily doing them from a perspective of taking proactive decisions about where you wanted your career to go. It was more about how you wanted to develop, I'm assuming, as an individual, and the things that stimulated you and made you excited about showing up every day. Is that fair?
I think it's 100% fair. And I think when you start with something you love, it inevitably brings joy. And it sometimes brings some recognition and reward, because if you're in your element, you're doing what you do well, it suits you, it feels natural, you're making a unique contribution. Quite often, other people go, well done, you're doing well, you're a great producer or a great coach or whatever it is you're doing, because you're in your element and you love it. If, on the other hand, you start from a place of, what can I do to become rich and famous? What can I do to get applause? What can I do to make money? What can I do to get fame? It never brings joy. It never brings joy. That's not a joyous path, because you're not. It's not, joy isn't even in the equation. You're doing it because you want recognition and reward. And in those instances, sometimes, rarely I would say, but sometimes it does bring recognition and reward. You become rich and famous for doing something which isn't necessarily your passion or your love, but you become rich and famous. But it never brings joy. So it's so much better to start from a place of joy and be surprised by the recognition and reward, because you're doing what you love every day. I would say that's the biggest work that I do, with my clients, to help them build lives they don't need to escape from.
And was there a eureka moment, do you think, Remy, when you really realized that coaching your fellow team and your colleagues at ITV Studios was not going to bring you that level of fulfillment? Was there a moment where you thought, I'm going to have to take this outside of this building and set up properly?
Yeah, and it probably happened after ITV Studios, when I was coaching colleagues who I was investing in a business that I started after ITV Studios, which was really like a creative incubator for producers, and I was coaching them, right? Because that's what I thought my gift was, but they didn't want it.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted the money, and they wanted to be left alone. But they hadn't hired me as their coach. So that probably was the eureka moment when I just realized this is actually toxic, right? Because I am a coach for people who haven't hired me to be a coach. This is not good, right? This is like saying I'm going to be your friend, but you don't want to be my friend. It's like any relationship, like the relationship of a coach and a client, is a two-way thing, and it needs everyone's permission. And so that was probably the moment, a bit later than ITV, when I actually decided I need to go all in on being a coach with people who want to be coached. And I think I did take some of the things I'd learned from being in TV to my coaching practice, not all at once and not all at first.
After completing his coaching training, Remy realised that, just like finding his niche at Brighter Pictures, he would have to do the same to stand out as a number one coach.
But to create a practice, you have to define yourself in the same way that you do with a production company, by saying, this is my specialty, this is what I do best. And I now, my specialty is coaching founders of creative businesses. And that helps them feel that I understand their unique pain, where they've been, their journey. And it also allows me to work with my ideal clients. But it also, is a bit scary when you're creating a niche that is so narrow, because you start out thinking, well, that's excluding 95% of the world, 95% of the market. But when you say, I'll do everything for anyone, no one comes, right? It's only when you say, I'll do this very specific thing for this very specific audience, that you actually have a chance of attracting an audience.
And do you think your transition from being an entrepreneur to supporting entrepreneurs is an obvious one for everybody? Or do you think it's particular to you, really, in terms of who you are as a person and what you believe in?
I think everyone's path is different, and how they feel in that seat in the orchestra depends on their sensibility. For me, it felt like a very natural evolution. And like I said, I felt like I'd sort of been doing it for years anyway. There's something very special about having someone say, I would like your advice for an hour a week or an hour a month, and I would like to work out what's going on in my life with you. And it's a very trusted space. And I feel like I'm able to make a unique contribution, not only because of my lived experience or my training as a coach, but really everything, just through who I am as a person. I think the fundamental connection of all of this is when we feel, each of us, that we are making a unique contribution, we're always at our happiest, at our best. When each of us feels like what we're doing really pretty much no one else could do as well or better, that is when we feel most joy. If I feel, even now, today as a coach with a client, if I feel like, you know what, there probably are better coaches for you than me, I don't feel so excited as when I feel like I'm probably the best coach there is for you. Now, that's not arrogance on my...
No, I don't think that is arrogant at all, Remy, because, I'm very lucky to have you as a coach, because I think your niche and your kind of very clear superpower of looking after founders of creative companies is exactly what attracted me to you in the first place. But then it's become so much more powerful than that, because you'd founded and sold 2 companies in the TV space, and that was what I needed help with at the time. Specifically, was selling my TV company to another company. But also, it's not just about the technicalities of that. It's mostly about the cycle you talk about, that kind of cycle of growing something, working very, very hard to get it to a certain point, and then being able to move away from it afterwards and figure out what your next chapter is. That is such a challenging part of that cycle. luckily I'm through the other side with a lot of help from you. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, well, thank you for that acknowledgement. It's a two-way thing. Having an ideal coach means having an ideal client, and it is about that match. But I think for all of us, life is just so much more joyful when we feel like we're doing what we love and what we do best, and we're making a contribution to other people.
Now, before we find out which of Remy's big swings he thinks was the most impactful, I want to take a moment to tell you about next week's special guest. Dan Snow is one of the UK's most beloved historians. He's the author of several popular history books and the presenter of many premium documentaries, most of them for the BBC. But he's also the co-founder and creative driving force behind the planet's most popular digital platform dedicated to history, History Hit. Last year, they told the world all about the discovery of Shackleton's lost ship Endurance in Antarctica, broadcasting across social media, podcast and premium video, and gaining a spot on the front page of the New York Times. It's a massively inspiring story about what creative focus and drive can achieve. Now, back to Remy. Which of his big swings does he feel was the most significant to his success? Was it number 1, heading off to New York to start a career in television? Number 2, coming off air as a presenter and setting up his very own independent production company, Brighter Pictures? Or was it swing 3, after a hugely successful career as a top TV executive, retraining as an executive coach to help others to achieve their success in media land?
I think probably the decision to become a coach, although it wouldn't have happened without the other two, because where would I have been if I hadn't made the other two decisions? Deciding to be a coach was the decision that I made completely on my own and without the market saying the world needs another coach. But it felt right to me and it felt true to who I was. And so I feel like I'm going to go with that one.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'm very grateful that you did take that decision because it's been very helpful for me and it's allowed us to work together. So thank you on behalf of all the other dozens of people that you've helped along the way.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that was my conversation with Remy Blumenfeld, my coach, an amazing man who has helped me figure out some of the most important decisions I've had to make over my career in recent years. And listening back, you just realize how classy Remy is. He is so thoughtful, he's so eloquent, and it's really a pleasure to spend time with him. He encourages me such a lot and holds me to account so amazingly well, time after time. I owe him a great deal, so thank you so much, Remy, for all the help you give me and for taking part in this conversation for the podcast today. What were my big takeaways from Remy? Well, number 1, Remy's drive and determination is remarkable. And going over to become an anchor in New York is a brave thing to do when you're young, and putting yourself out there as a hardworking, driven young person at a time when the world loved TV presenters more than anything on earth must have been an incredible, thrilling ride, but also required a great deal of hard work and sacrifice. So I admire Remy's drive and persistence. Number 2, really it's about putting your ego away. Success is all about being humble at the end of the day, because you have to make great sacrifices, and being able to step away from being famous on television and figuring out that he needed to pivot towards becoming a producer and entrepreneur. You know, it's a hard thing to do, and I recognize Remy's sacrifice and bravery in walking away from his ego and towards what the world really wanted from him at that stage. Number 3, really, I think it's about wisdom and compassion, because I think if I was going to take anything from Remy, it would be those 2 things. All of that hard-won experience, all of the knocks that he survived, his great bravery and positivity is amazing, and the compassion that he has to share that knowledge with other people in a caring and thoughtful and positive way, always finding the route to the next step rather than worrying about what's happened in the background, is an incredible set of kind attributes that he's willing to share with other people, which is amazing. And thank you, Remy, for everything. Thank you to everybody else for listening to the Big Swing podcast. Hope you have a great week. Big Swing podcast is made in association with the fantastic Spirit Studios. Our executive producer is Fred Casella. Our episode producer is Lauren Avery. Our sound designer is Will Horrocks. And The Big Swing was created by me, Sam Barcroft. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell all your friends about it and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to check out next week's episode with the remarkable Dan Snow, founder of History Hit. Thanks so much for listening to The Big Swing.